So, a week or two ago, we had a pretty interesting discussion online about controllers being backwards compatible completely. And it seemed that was coming from Microsoft saying you can use your old Xbox One controllers on the Series X and the eventual Series S, and Sony doing the opposite and saying that your PlayStation DualShock 4 controller won't work with the PlayStation 5. They just want to have a cutoff there with generations and say, look, the DualSense is what we're going with here. You're going to need one of those when you get a PlayStation 5, which, I mean, one controller comes with the system anyway. So there are a lot of people who just said, well, all right, I guess that's fine. It'd be nice if I could use my DualShock 4 because I don't know how good the DualSense is going to be. People might prefer that DualShock 4, but for the most part, we've always had this in mind, right? Going to a new generation, usually there was a new controller. We just did it with the Switch in 2017, right? We had to get a new Pro controller. The Wii U Pro controller didn't work with the Switch. And a lot of it had to do with some of the new features Nintendo did, which mostly was the HD rumble, right? The more precise haptic feedback that was in that controller and is also in the DualSense controller. Well, Sony is continuing their small little drip feed of information as they go towards, I guess, the price. I don't know. We're about to be in September. The system comes out November, second week maybe, and we don't know how much it costs. So there we go. Okay. Maybe that's the next piece of info. We'll see. But they released a trailer, and they released this blog write-up where they went around to different studios and basically got these interview questions about what they were using the DualSense for in their games to kind of make it a bit unique, right, towards the features that the DualSense have now. And some of them are pretty cool. There's one in particular that I saw and I said, wow, that is really, really clever. So we're going to go over that today, and we're also going to take a look inside of the new Xbox controller as we have an image of the system without the controller without the front of it on, so the shell is removed. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it down below and subscribe as we head towards the next-gen launches. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and I think there should be some information coming out relatively soon from Sony as, again, we expect pricing and maybe another game for their launch lineup. Anyway, let's go over here. Brad Sams did post an image of the controller for the Xbox Series S and the Xbox Series X. Remember, we had controllers leak out very early, with the street date being, I think it was November 6th on the outside of the packaging, but they got out. So they're not in the back of a Best Buy anymore. People just have them now, and they were checking them out. And part of that includes disassembling it. So you can see here we have an image. The image on the right, I grabbed online. That is what the regular Xbox One controller looks like if you take yours apart, and then on the left is the newer controller, and you can see at the bottom, yes, it is using the older style haptic feedback, the older rumble motors that we've had pretty much forever now, right? Since it really came around, where you have one side that's weighted without the other, and it basically oscillates when it spins, and that gives you a very basic rumble sensation. Like I said, it's been used for a while now, right? Whereas on the newer ones, we have linear actuator motors that can do all kinds of crazy sensations and even make noise, actual sound. So that's something that the DualSense will be leveraging alongside of the Switch now. But looking at the front of this, it looks very similar. Like, if you're looking at this and saying they look kind of like the same controller, I mean, you're not completely wrong there. Now we, of course, have the center button that's going, the create button or the share button or whatnot. And otherwise, yes, the form factor is slightly different on the inside, but a lot of that comes down to the shell itself being one piece now rather than two pieces, technically, where the top looks more like the 360 shoulder buttons. So I think there will be a slightly different feel on those bumpers. So like left bumper and right bumper might feel a little different. But yeah, it's very, very similar, which makes sense as to why Microsoft said you can bring your controllers over, because they didn't change things up too much. The D-pad, of course, is different. I need to see what that D-pad is like, first of all, okay? Because it definitely looks a bit different. It is kind of curved upwards, so maybe it does feel a bit better than the Xbox One controller, but from what we can tell, it's still kind of like a clicky kind of D-pad. So there we go there. Not a ton to look at here. Of course, Microsoft says that they've done a few things internally, like the latency has dropped on the controller when it comes to wireless functionality. That's good news. So we'll see how all of that works when it does ship. Now, moving over to the DualSense controller, this was the post that PlayStation put up online, presenting PlayStation's first global ad spot showcasing key immersive features for the PS5 console generation. They, of course, do the whole thing where you pull back on a bow and they try to say, oh yeah, this is something you'll be able to feel with the controller. Again, we'll see about that one with those adaptive triggers. But the thing that I liked about this is they did go around to some of the first parties and asked them how they were using it, and as well as some third parties. So let's go through a few of these. For example, they talked to the creative director for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and they do mention here, the haptic feedback precision allows us to do all sorts of new things, and Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales will be hinting to players which directions attacks are coming from by providing haptic feedback from the appropriate direction on the DualSense wireless controller. If you've used the Switch controller, for example, it can basically vibrate and rumble different points of the controller to have different sensations occur. Think of like 1-2 Switch, which is still like the best showcase for the newer haptic feedback or the HD rumble in the controller, where you would do things like how many marbles are in the controller. You move around and it felt like there was something in the controller kind of rolling around. That's something that they could do here. They also talk about how you can hold down square to do a venom punch, and you feel Spider-Man's bioelectricity crackle across from the left side of the controller to the right. So it'll have like kind of this movement across the back of the controller, I guess, where you're holding it. And you'll technically feel that in real time. See, things like that, just using the rumble to kind of push more sensations to you while you're playing the game is pretty awesome. But this is the one I didn't even really think about, but I could see this being used in games going forward, right? And that is for Deathloop. They say, Deathloop being a first-person shooter, we do a lot of things to make weapons feel differently from one another. One I like is blocking the triggers when your weapon jams to give the player an immediate feedback even before the animation plays out, which prompts the player in a physical way they have to unjam their gun. I don't know, maybe you have to like shake your DualSense controller around. I am curious, the more we have to move these things around, the more chance we are to break them, of course, but we've done a lot with the DualShock 4s, whether we're shaking them like a spray can, for example. So the idea of them blocking one of the triggers from being pulled, that one is probably going to annoy some people. And two, I almost wonder if like it could be broken because people get really annoyed with it and they just try to pull on it anyway, and it actually damages the mechanism inside. So how sturdy that controller is, that's still a question that's up in the air. We'll take it apart, though, and see exactly how that's working. I like the idea of that, though, and I could see that as something that maybe even like Battlefield uses, right? Where the new Battlefield takes advantage of that, where if your gun jams, the trigger won't pull anymore, and you have to do something to unjam it. That is a pretty cool idea. Another one I liked here is from Godfall. While I'm not really overly excited about the game itself, the idea of being able to convey different weapons that you are holding without you even having to look at the UI necessarily and go through and figure out which one you're holding. That's again another interesting idea. They said, I'm excited to finally feel which weapon I'm holding in my hands without looking at any UI. I can also sense where an enemy is spatially, even outside my field of view. So like they'd be able to do different rumble points on the controller itself so that you can feel if there is an enemy behind you about to swing an axe at you or something, right? That could also technically work with Spider-Man, where you have like Spidey sense, where maybe you can all of a sudden have something pop up on the controller, like some sort of rumble telling you where you're about to get hit from because of that. Like those, again, are good ideas, I think, for using this. And check this one out. This is another one I didn't really think of for Ratchet and Clank. They say the adaptive triggers are something we're excited to feature. For instance, the Enforcer is a dual-barreled shotgun type weapon. As you pull the trigger, you'll fire from one barrel, and you could feel resistance around halfway down the trigger. Need a bigger blast, pull the trigger through that resistance point, and you'll fire both barrels at the same time. So they would have different resistance points set up. Like half a press, even like a quarter press maybe for different weapons that have maybe multiple shots in it. So instead of like maybe being timed or something like it would have been before, you can either push it down all the way, halfway, or whatnot, and you'll have different amounts of ammo shoot out. That is cool. It's going to come down to, I think, because I'm looking at this DualShock 4, how much travel there is for this trigger on the DualSense compared to the DualShock 4. That sounds like something that would take some getting used to. And the more I hear about these adaptive triggers, the more interested I am in opening it up to see how that is exactly working inside. And then we have a few others for like Astrobot and Sac Boy here, where they talk about how different surfaces can be conveyed through the rumble itself. That's, again, something they can explain all day long, but we'll have to actually see how accurate it is and how it feels when you're playing the game. And then we have Gran Turismo. Now, this is exactly where I thought the adaptive triggers would come in. They do talk about a typical ABS releases brake pressure intermittently while the driver applies pressure to the pedal. The adaptive trigger is suited for recreating this pedal feel, and it will allow the player to accurately feel and understand the relationship between the braking force they want and the tire's grip. Now, because the PlayStation 5 will support this, I almost wonder if we will see steering wheels that come out that have similar things, I guess, built in to then function with the PlayStation 5, because that seems like on its own, that could also get to another form of realism for these driving games. I have to say, so far what they're saying with the DualSense controller sounds good, but for me, it's going to depend on how long they support this, because they could have easily just be like, well, we don't really feel like working with the haptic feedback or the more accurate haptic feedback as much anymore, as much as we want to focus on the game itself. We've seen this before where something comes out and it's really popular when it first shows up, right? And it's a feature on the controller, and then it slowly fades away and isn't used nearly as much in the game as it was at launch. So here's hoping that these things work out, because, of course, the HD rumble, the advanced haptic feedback, also used in the Switch. So let's say the PS5 takes off. Well, the Switch would benefit from it, as well as third parties would use it for both when it comes to that, whether it's different texture on the ground that you're walking across, right, or being able to sense enemies around you in a third-party game. And, you know, we assume that the Switch's successor would come out during the PlayStation 5's life as well, and who knows, I guess the rumble would transfer over to that too. So a lot of excitement, hopefully, with third parties getting more on board with this HD rumble, because you don't see that as much with some of the third parties when it comes to the Switch. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. Are you surprised at any of these ideas that were brought up here by some of these first parties and even third parties like Deathloop and the gun itself jamming when you pull down the trigger? Pretty cool idea. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.